Hello there. I hope you're all well wherever you are. I've got some sections from Ouspensky and Gurdjieff today. Interesting stuff. But let's begin with that famous piece of poetry that Gurdjieff liked from Gilgamesh. I will tell thee, Gilgamesh, of a mournful mystery of the gods, how once, having met together, they resolved to flood the land of Shuruppak. Clear-eyed Ea, saying nothing to his father Anu, nor to the Lord, the great Enlil, nor to the spreader of happiness Nimuru, nor even to the underworld prince Enwar, called him his son Ubaratat, and said to him, Build thyself a ship, take with thee thy near ones, and what birds and beasts thou will. Irrevocably have the gods resolved to flood the land of Shuruppak. Well, I guess when you hear the word flood or deluge, you imagine some kind of global tsunami. But I noticed in Genesis, when they talked about parting the seas, it seemed more like the levels of consciousness. Water, feelings, consciousness. And we also have to remember that there is nothing really physical, that everything is some type of consciousness, everything is alive and awake in some way, even the seas. They have memories. And it seems to me that today with the internet, mobile phones, everybody is flooded. The whole thing is flooded. Nobody is an island anymore. We're flooded in many ways. Even the sugar that they lace all the food in the supermarket with, sugar is something that connects different parts of your energetic system together. It feels good, but in the long term it's not very good for you. And that's what's happening with the world. This global connectivity. By connecting everybody together, what you do is destroy all the castes. You destroy the structures of society, and the societies, the nations themselves, being structures within all of humanity. And as all the walls get knocked down, the entire structure of human life is broken. Now perhaps somebody somewhere thinks that this is a utopia. Anybody who's done any hard work or any engineering realizes that if you crumble everything together, it's like putting all the paints together. That's how it seems to me. I'm going to do some P.D. Ouspensky today. Material from an old book he wrote, A New Model of the Universe. He says, It is the year 1906. The editorial office of the Moscow daily paper, The Morning. I have just received the foreign papers, and I have to write an article on the forthcoming Hague Conference. French, German, English, Italian papers. Phrases, sympathetic, critical, ironical, blatant, pompous, lying, and worst of all, utterly automatic. Phrases which have been used 1,000 times and will be used again on entirely different, perhaps contradictory occasions. I have to make a survey of all these words and opinions, pretending to take them seriously, and then, just as seriously, to write something on my own account. But what can I say? It's all so tedious. Diplomats and all kinds of statesmen will gather together and talk. Papers will approve or disapprove, sympathize or not sympathize. Then everything will be as it was, or even worse. It is still early, I say to myself. Perhaps something will come into my head later. Pushing aside the papers, I open a drawer in my desk. The whole desk is crammed with books with strange titles. The Occult World, Life After Death, Atlantis and Lemuria, Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, Le Temple de Satan, The Sincere Narrations of a Pilgrim, and the like. These books and I have been inseparable for a whole month, and the world of Hague conferences and leading articles becomes more and more vague, foreign and unreal to me. I open one of the books at random, feeling that my article will not be written today. Well, it can go to the devil. Humanity will lose nothing if there is one article the less on the Hague Conference. All these talks about a universal peace are only Manilov's dreams about building a bridge across the pond. Nothing can ever come out of it, first of all because the people who start conferences and those who are going to debate on peace will sooner or later start a war. Wars do not begin by themselves, neither do peoples begin them, however much they are accused of it. It is just those men with their good intentions who are the obstacles to peace. But is it possible to expect that they will ever understand this? Has anybody ever understood his own worthlessness? A great many wicked thoughts occurred to me about the Hague Conference, but I realized that none of them are printable. But here, in these books, there is a strange flavor of truth. Yep, Ouspensky sure was an interesting man. Some people accuse him of being too intellectual, but that's not it really. He wasn't really intellectual. He could feel many things, he could talk beautifully about many things. His intellect, if he used it, was sensitive. And he was a seeker. He felt many things that ordinary people cannot feel. He was not intellectual. Not in that sense. But his orientation was quite different to Gurdjieff. He was an educated, cultured man who tried to look with the eyes of his education, with the intelligence that had been taught to him, and go from there. Whereas Gurdjieff worked his way up from the bottom. Gurdjieff's claws were long, and there was a lot of earth underneath them. Gurdjieff knew the earth, and he knew its ways. He knew many things, and you could never take that away from him. And you could never really duplicate it. Modern man, most men in the modern world, cannot come from the same direction that Gurdjieff came from. They come from Ouspensky's direction. But Ouspensky often said that an entirely new road of knowledge would have to open up for something new to happen on this world. And it's here that Gurdjieff provides critical insight. Because the modern man does not live like traditional man lived. His education has become far too thick. And in fact, all the sights and sounds, noise and machines of the modern world make man dull. It's not necessarily true that there is no value in human life, ordinary life, family life, in nations, races and blood, or the 5 elements. But the question is, can modern man even feel these things? Today we seem to be really in the middle of some great catastrophe. After all, the Western world, the pinnacle of the planet, they no longer recognize men or women. They are twisting and bending nature. It's quite evil. And if you cannot tell the difference between the day and the night, you are doomed. And what has happened, no doubt, to modern people is that everything that they've made has created insensitivity inside of them. And being insensitive, they don't feel alive. They cannot feel aliveness from their hearth and the joy of being home and being loved. They question it because all they do is question things. All they do is rebel against any authority, any structure, any brick, anything that is not flat and dead. They question it. They pull it all down. Their insensitivity has made them mad. and it's hard for them to be happy anymore. Even small things they don't trust. They are destroying themselves, aren't they? Ouspensky did some very interesting experiments with himself, looking inside into his mind for answers, to see what he knew and what he could know and what he could receive. So I'm just going to read one section of these experiments when he talks about 3 types of cognition. He says, "With regard to what I learned during my experiments, particularly with regard to the increase of the possibility of cognition, I came to know much that was strange and that did not enter into any theories that I had known before. The consciousness which communicated with me by means of moving hieroglyphs attached the greatest importance to this question and strove to impress on my mind, perhaps more than anything else, all that related to this question, that is, to the methods of cognition. I mean that the hieroglyphs explained to me that besides the ordinary cognition based on the evidence of the sense organs, on calculation and on logical thinking, there exist 3 other different cognitions, which differ from one another and from the ordinary cognition, not in degree, not in form, not in quality, but in their very nature, as phenomena of utterly different orders which cannot be measured by the same measure. In our language we call these 3 phenomena together, where we recognize their existence, intensified cognition. That is, we admit their difference from the ordinary cognition, but do not understand their difference from one another. This, according to the hieroglyphs, is the chief factor in preventing us from understanding rightly our relation to the world. I will try to set forth as exactly as possible all that refers to this question, but I doubt whether I shall succeed in fully expressing even what I understand myself. The first cognition is learning in an unusual way, as though through inner vision, anything relating to things and events with which I am directly connected and in which I am directly and personally interested. For instance, if I learn something which must happen in the near future to me, or to someone closely connected with me, and if I learn it not in the ordinary way but through inner vision, this would be cognition of that kind. If I learn that a steamer on which I have to sail will be wrecked, or if I learn that on a definite day serious danger will threaten one of my friends, and if I learn that by taking such and such a step I can avert the danger, this will be cognition of the first kind, or the first cognition. Personal interest constitutes a necessary condition of this cognition. Personal interest connects a man in a certain way with things and events, enables him to occupy in relation to them a definite position of cognition. Personal interest, that is, the presence of the person interested, is an almost necessary condition of fortune-telling, clairvoyance, prediction of the future. Without personal interest, these are almost impossible. The second cognition is also cognition of ordinary things and events in our life, for knowing which we have no ordinary means, just as in the first case, but with which nothing connects us personally. If I learn that a steamer will be wrecked, in the fate of which I am not personally interested at all, on which neither I nor any of my friends is sailing, if I learn that which is happening in my neighbour's house, but which has no relation to myself, if I learn for certain who actually were the persons who are considered historical enigmas, like the man in the Iron Mask, or Dimitri the Pretender, or the Comte de Saint-Germain, if I learn somebody's future or past, again having no relation to myself, this will be the second kind of cognition. The second kind of cognition is the most difficult, and is almost impossible, because if a man accidentally or with the aid of special means or methods learned more than other people can know, he would certainly do so in the first way. The second kind of cognition contains something unlawful. It is magic, in the full sense of the word. The first and third ways of cognition in comparison with it appear simple and natural, though the first, based on emotional apprehension, presentiment, or desire of some kind, looks like a psychological trick, and the third way appears as a continuation of ordinary cognition, but along new lines and on new principles. The third cognition is cognition based on knowledge of the mechanism of everything existing, by knowing all the mechanisms and by knowing all the relations of the separate parts. It is easy to arrive at the smallest detail and determine with absolute precision everything connected with this detail. The third cognition is cognition based on calculation. Everything can be calculated. If the mechanism of everything is known, it is possible to calculate what kind of weather there will be in a month's time or in a year's time. It would be possible to calculate the day and hour of every occurrence. It would be possible to calculate the meaning and significance of every small event that is observed. The difficulty of the third order of cognition consists first in the necessity of knowing the whole mechanism for the cognition of the smallest thing, and second in the necessity for putting in motion the whole colossal machine of knowledge in order to know something quite small and insignificant. My thoughts on those three types of cognition are that in the third one, he may be talking about noticing the flow of energy around us and seeing the octaves of events. And by seeing octaves and connections between things, you can predict what's going to happen in the future. You don't need to know the entire universe, you just need to be able to see a sort of set of interrelating energetic patterns and things. And then you could predict the future for this area. In the first, he's talking about some sort of intuition, because you have a connection to the people involved, and so you can draw on that, you can draw knowledge from that. And in the second, he's talking about something that you're not really connected to, for instance the lottery numbers, and trying to pull that out, which he says violates certain laws of nature and therefore is magic. Later on, he also says that he was never able to really affect anything in the real world by these methods. And I think this is very interesting, because Gurdjieff was able to affect things in the real world. What's the difference? Well, Ouspensky is not somebody who has had much contact with spiritual people. He is a reader, a writer, a cultured man, but he has not really had much experience of spiritual teaching, of spiritual teachers, of context, of practices. And that makes all the difference, because frankly, if you're reading books, even interesting books, even if you have interesting thoughts, it doesn't really change anything, as you can see. The spiritual methods change your substance, change many things inside of you, and you just won't know the significance of them unless you do them. And if we look out into the world today, all these groups that try to do like Ouspensky tried to do and fail, just like Ouspensky failed. In other words, in the people who study this material today in the world, they all act like Ouspensky acted, and none of them seem to have any power that Gurdjieff developed. And that feels safe, because then people can say to themselves, I'm working so hard, I'm doing the work. But then they never actually change. And so they feel safe. They feel like they're doing something really amazing, but nothing really happens. They like that. They like that because the spirit of a spiritual seeker is somebody who desperately needs to change and is willing to put their life on the line. They have a very different approach. Life is exceptionally confusing. It is very confusing. I desperately struggle to find reasonable direction in my life. My teacher was quite good at cutting down the small branches of problems and sticking to the principal problem and the principal solution and making practical progress. Particularly, Ouspensky is one of those people who are so easy to criticize, for instance, Christianity, or have some opinions about it, but to actually go into the church and try to take seriously their methods, he doesn't do that. What he's trying to do is, one way or the other, receive a revelation. He's trying to receive some kind of knowledge just pulled out of the ether. What he isn't doing is working to develop his substances. I don't think he even would understand what that meant. I don't know if he could, do 5 hours of Qigong or something, or pranayama, or any of those things. It's not really that complicated, is it? Is it that complicated to go and get one of these DVDs and just start doing it and seeing the effects? He doesn't seem to do any of this stuff. But he likes to talk. It's like people are obsessed with their mind and their thoughts, and they think, well, let's think some more. Surely if I think some more, something's going to happen. It doesn't happen. One thing I was thinking this week is, we are surrounded by fools. We're surrounded by low IQ people. That's what the Kali Yuga means. It means there is no more structure and order in society. So the lowest people in society are riding around and they make things very difficult. It's actually quite painful to listen to all the teachers in the world because they don't know anything. And yet, on the other side, there are many people who say, renounce the world, there is only the oneness. But it's not like that. Just because the world is full of fools, it doesn't mean that the world doesn't have meaning and that knowledge can't be gained. It can. It's just very difficult. In the final analysis, it's just very difficult. One of the guiding principles that I had since I was a lot younger was that I have to do things and see what happens. For the rest, they will talk and they have mastered the art of appearance, and they will talk right until they die, and only then will you be relieved of their talking. The narrow gate, or the narrow path, means that even if we live in a confusing world, there still is a structured and ordered path from where we are to the top of the mountain. It does exist. If some people refuse knowledge, they say there is no knowledge. They are people who are suffering the weight of the insanity of the planet, and they are unable to resolve it, to see clearly. Some principles I can tell you are, unless you work, you will not be able to understand. You're not developing yourself enough. You can't understand just by reading or receiving something. You have to work it. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, you have to be busy. You have to try things, do things. This brings your own individuality to life. You cannot understand things by sitting in a room waiting for the magic whatnot. There is a balance between your own will activity and the reception of something else, and together they can create knowledge in you. That's one principle. Another principle is that there is the map and there are mountain. You have to become comfortable with having technical knowledge that is then applied through disciplines, and then there's the receipt of changes inside of you. Those things. The map, the practice, and the effect it has on you. And another principle is that even if things are relative, you can still learn. You can still learn today, even if you're drowning in hell. You can still learn something. So learn. And another principle is the sense of the inner final analysis. Things are very confusing here, but simplify them and make tracks. So these are some principles. Another principle is, if you see a teacher and he gives you a presentation for an hour and 15 minutes, look at him very carefully at the end, because he'll be tired and his mask will start coming off, and then you can determine the character of this man. I was just dipping into Kathryn Hulme's book, which I particularly like. And this part about Gurdjieff, it says, he gazed at the dazzling chorus girls whilst sipping his Vittel. Their coarse vitality as they greeted each other seemed to amuse him. Then his attention swung back to us. Rubbing the bandaged hand ruminatively, he began speaking about a chateau on the Marne, which he had inspected, renting for some 12,000 francs a year, an appropriate place to see the people he soon must be seeing. "Such a place we have now," he said, "is not convenient. We must have more solid place. From this perhaps can begin the actualization. We will see what future will flow from this." Gurdjieff says, "No one in my house ever proposes my health. Never do I drink a toast outside of idiot toasts, and only he who drink to number 21 can propose my health." Miss Gordon is brave. She speaks up for the stricken niece in her clipped English voice. "But once a year you used to allow Mr. Gurdjieff, like tonight, at the Priory." He comes back to the table grumbling. "At Priory? That was other place, other kind of people." So what I take from that is that the work done at the Priory was of a certain type. It was actualizing. The people there were more real. And the work done later on at the Rue de Colonel Renard, at its flat, was prior to actualization. And different people were there. And there are different people, and there are different circumstances. It feels different, and the possibilities are different. And these things must be learned. You must do what you can with the situation you are in, feeling it carefully and understanding that